Good morning and welcome to our Lent course. We're focusing on Lent for everyone using the Gospel of Mark and the book written by Tom Wright. Today we begin with Mark chapter 1 verses 21 to 28. They went to Capernaum. At once on the Sabbath Jesus went into the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his teaching. He wasn't like the legal teachers. He said things on his own authority. All at once in their synagogue there was a man with an unclean spirit. "What business have you got with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" he replied. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You are God's Holy One." "Be quiet," ordered Jesus, "and come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed the man, gave a great shout, and came out of him. Everyone was astonished. "What is this?" they started to say to each other. "New teaching with real authority. He even tells the unclean spirits what to do, and they do it." Word about Jesus spread all at once, all over the surrounding district of Galilee. Once upon a time it was an organist night off. His deputy was fresh from college and looked even younger than he actually was. Took charge of the choir. The singers, a good-hearted lot, but choirs will be choirs, and almost instinctively pushing the boundaries to see what would happen. Trivial things, a note fluffed here and there, a lead missed, but most trivial of all were a telltale sign of implicit rebellion. Some were wearing brown shoes, and not the regulation black. I watched as they processed back after the service. The young man didn't bat an eyelid. Very quietly, with rigid accuracy, he said, alerted them to their mistakes. "And gentlemen, black shoes, please." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was in charge, and they knew it. Point made. It was good to see him do this. The surprise of authority, someone's in charge here, we'd better sit up and take notice, is what Mark is highlighting in this early incident in Jesus' career. And it shows so much of the gospel is all about. Jesus was going about telling people that God was at last becoming the king. And he was behaving as if he himself was in charge, if he were the king. And there's a puzzle, as much as a puzzle for Jesus' first hearers as for Mark as well, as it is for us. Mark contrasts Jesus' authority with that of the legal teachers. We may not immediately pick up on the significance of this. In the modern Western world, legal teachers are presumably teaching in a law school, where young practitioners to be trained for their various tasks. But in ancient Israel, a legal teacher was much more than that. Israel's law went back to Moses, after all, or rather to God, as Moses received those laws on Mount Sinai from God. The law from them wasn't just a system of rules and regulations. It was the ultimate revelation of what it meant to be human in the eyes of God, what it meant to be God's people, what it meant to walk with God. And when the Jewish people were hemmed in and oppressed by pagan enemies, as they were in Jesus' day, the law was the badge they wore proudly to show that they really belonged to God. Even if things were tough just now, to teach the law in the world was much more than training the next generation to be barristers. It meant setting the social and cultural boundaries. It meant maintaining God's people in their district and their distinct and special identity. But people who taught the law did so not on their own authority, but interpreting and applying God's law. And Jesus spoke with his own authority. "You have heard what was said," he says, "but I say to you, blah, blah, blah." And he backed this up with speaking with action. Here we run into a problem for us. Jesus' world, as in many parts of the world today, lives were blighted by the forces or powers beyond their control that seem to take them over. People say in our world, "I don't know what made me do it." People in Jesus' world reckon they did know, why some people seem totally off the rails. They were hostile spiritual forces out there, hard to define, but powerful in their effect. Calling such a force a demon or an unclean spirit didn't mean they knew exactly what it was. It was a way of saying that person was overpowered by something outside themselves. As part of the point of God becoming king at last, which was the central message of what Jesus brought, was that all rival powers were being defeated. Jesus came with power and authority. For God's becoming meant that all other forces had to be dethroned, And the most obvious sign was the dark, shadowy forces that could seize control of some benighted individuals. These forces were cunning. They seemed to know too much. How here and elsewhere we see people they controlled shouting out what Jesus wanted the stage to keep secret. He was God's. He was God's Holy One, and he was God. And he had come ultimately to destroy all forces of evil. They seem to have the inside track on this threat. Whether we like it or not in this modern age, this is a sure sign that these stories were not made up. The early Christians were unlikely to invent testimony to Jesus from the lips of the disturbed individuals. For Mark and for us, I suggest that stories like this should flag up the fact that there are many things in this world that appear to go horribly wrong with the best brains we can't even analyse, let alone solve. The experience of inhumane, terrifying regimes around the world over the last century teaches us that forces can be unleashed, which make people do unimaginable, terrible, terrible things. People can be cruel and harsh and evil to each other. And all this happened at a time when in the modern Western world at least people have banished religions and even Jesus to the sidelines. Maybe that is not where Jesus needs to be. Fortunately, Jesus refuses to stay in the corner, just as he refused to fit into the expectations of the townfolk in Capernaum. He insists on being in charge, even though it will be at the cost of his own life. This is the pattern of the whole gospel, ending up on the cross itself, where strangely Jesus does defeat the powers of darkness. Lord our God, help us to follow this Lent. Help us to work together for the good in your world. Let us remember that you are sovereign. Help us to trust you when things seem out of control, when things seem difficult, when things are not as they should be right now. Amen.